Hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Every so often, one has come across some of these postings on social media, people offering the panacea, if you want, to Africa's problems. Let's just listen to this.
You know why the West is scared of Africa becoming united? Because the day Africa stands together, the world order changes. Think about it. 54 African countries say no to the IMF tomorrow. No more repayments, no more conditions. The global economy would shake. Markets would crash. Headlines would scream, crisis. But a crisis for who? Africa sends out trillions in gold, oil, cobalt, and diamonds, yet pays billions back in debt to the same institutions that once colonized it. This isn't about loans, it's about control. Because the IMF and the World Bank weren't built for African independence, they were built for African dependence. That's why unity terrifies them. A united Africa would mean one currency backed by our own gold and oil, one voice in global trade, one defense force to protect our land and seas. Imagine Africa saying we won't pay until our debts are reviewed and reparations discussed. That's not default, that's power. And maybe that's why leaders who dreamed of unity, Nkrumah, Lumumba, and Gaddafi, were removed before they could finish what they started. Because once Africa stands together, it won't need permission to lead, only the courage to act.
Well, that is very rich. I think we need to look at Africa more realistically. We, people like myself, who come from Zimbabwe, we have had leaders. If there's one thing that Mugabe was renowned for, was his rhetoric against the West. In fact, it used to infuriate many Zimbabweans how many individuals, blacks particularly, from the rest of Africa and beyond, used to praise Mugabe to the high heavens. And yet, the Zimbabweans themselves, who felt the consequences of his tyrannical regime, were not amused by his antics. We have got to address the problem of bad governance within the individual nations in Africa. Most of the countries, the 54 countries in Africa, are failing to govern themselves. This is a fundamental problem. We cannot run away from it. If you cannot govern a nation, what makes you think that uniting all the 54 countries will make those problems disappear? One of the biggest problems that we have in Africa right now is the problem of corruption. And it is interesting to note here that this lady is talking about uniting Africa. And yet, in an article circulating in social media, is this article here where the article is saying Kenya is exporting a staggering 42 tons of gold to the United Arab Emirates in 2025 alone. This is unbelievable. Africa, we are losing our resources hand over fist because of corruption. What is the point of talking of reparations when we are failing to manage what we have right now? This is hemorrhage at a serious scale. As a Zimbabwean, we saw a documentary in 2023, the Gold Mafia documentary, where 80%, according to the documentary, 80% of Zimbabwe's gold, worth $2 billion per annum, was being smuggled. We were not getting anything from it. Are we going to claim reparations for that as well? From whom? Our leaders are the ones who are behind, they're the godfathers behind all this corruption. And the 80% of the gold is not the only resource we are losing. Zimbabwe is losing the same amounts in diamonds, lithium, platinum, and other precious metals, to say nothing of other areas like procurement of goods and services. Corruption in Zimbabwe is sucking the life out of that country. As much as people can say, well, we want a United States of Africa, if you talk to some of our own regional members, we will know what is happening in Zimbabwe. They will tell you the last thing they would want is the SADC region being united. Who would want a leader like Mnangagwa as the head of state of SADC, given his checkered reputation? I don't think there will be many. And if I was in their shoes, I would not want a leader like that. Mnangagwa was the chairperson of SADC with no executive real powers for a year until August this year. And in that year, there were many reports of how he and his regime interfered in the elections of other SADC countries. What more if he was the head of state of the whole SADC region? I think the problem with many African countries is that we do not want to focus on the problem before us, or having tried to solve that problem. We want to move on to something else in the hope that the problem will go away. The problem of bad governance would go away. It doesn't. In the case of Mugabe, he used his anti-Western rhetoric to cover for his own failures to respect the dignity and the rights and freedoms of ordinary Zimbabweans. How many Zimbabweans would seriously forget that Mugabe was the man behind Kukurawundi, for instance? The 2008 election coup. all the corruption and mismanagement that has literally destroyed the country. Those are the problems we need to focus on before we start looking beyond Zimbabwe's own borders. Why we keep ignoring that problem beggars belief. The truth of the matter is, our ignoring it does not make the problem go away. The problem is still there, and we need to deal with that problem. I don't want to pretend that I'm a very religious individual, but I think this quotation from the parable of the tenants is very relevant for some of our African friends there who seem to think that the United States of Africa is this panacea to all our problems. This is Matthew 25, verse 24 to 26. Finally, the servant who had received 1 talent came and said, Master, I knew that you are a hard man, reaping where you have not sown, and gathering where you had not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your talent in the ground. See, you have what belongs to you. I think many people know that in Africa we have a problem. We have not made the best use of what we have. And this has not helped our situation one little bit. We need to solve the problem of bad governance within the individual countries before we start looking at regional unity, much less continental unity. This United States of Africa is not only a fool's dream, but dangerous fools too. Because they're dragging the continent from focusing on what they can actually achieve to chasing a mirage. Even if we were given these reparations, if we are losing 42 tons of gold, in smuggling, what makes you think that that reparation money will even land in Africa? It will be a revolving door. It will come in through one end, and before it even comes to Africa, it's back in Europe or the Far East or somewhere where the ruling elite can enjoy it, whilst the ordinary African continues to suffer. Of course, the ruling elite would love to chase these reparations because it draws attention away from the fact that they are failing to govern the country. They are looting the nation's wealth, as is the case in Zimbabwe, at an alarming rate. For heaven's sake, let's sort out the problems of each individual country first before we start thinking about a United States of Africa. Think about it. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.